And you are now on.
Okay. Good morning. It's Thursday, June 27th. This is a meeting of joint rules, House and Senate together. And senators and reps will remember probably that in the budget, we had a little bit of language. And that's really the reason why we're here today. It allowed the chairs of appropriations and the speaker and the pro tem to use carry forward money to increase public space in the building. And that public space that we're talking about was public rooms that were occupied during the COVID emergency. And the idea now is to return them to public use. So it's a decision tree, and we'll gradually make that clear. There are a couple of different plans for how we move forward, one of which involves an architect's design. Agatha is here and she can, if necessary, provide a little summary of that design. But I think folks are basically familiar with it. But the basic question is how best to return the public rooms to public use and also general Senate and House use. So in my estimation, we're talking most seriously about this room, room 10 and room 11. So they were the public meeting rooms and public access prior to COVID. So I thought maybe we could start with a little history of what happened during the COVID emergency, the decisions that were made, the authorizations that were made, what those consist of, and then we can talk from there about where we go as this iteration of the Rules Committee. So if that's okay, John, do you want to join us? And John has promised not to go back to the 1920s, but to start pretty much with.
Stick to your lifetime.
1960.
Yeah.
Good morning, Tom Bloomer, Senate Secretary, also acting clerk, or actually the clerk for this committee, the Rules Committee, not for the Appropriations Chair part of it, but for the overall Rules Committee. The background on that is generally the chair of the Joint Rules Committee alternates between the two chambers, and whoever the clerk or secretary is for the respective chambers is the one that sort of takes notes and keeps track. So overall, sort of big picture, there are two things as the Pro Tem was mentioning that you kind of need to look at today. One of them is the budget included some language to try to allow some allocation and some additional rooms to be used, which I'll give you a little history of, and then also kind of getting them allocated. Because historically, as I'll walk through, common rooms, there are certain rooms that have been historically attributed or given to the House, and they decide what committees go in those rooms. In the Senate, there are certain rooms that have been attributed to the Senate, and they decide what happens in those rooms. And then if there's going to be changes in rooms, then in that sense, the Rules Committee kind of decides. And I'll walk you through that, kind of how the history was in 21, 22, and how it was walked through in 20 after COVID. And so that sort of needs to be decided by this rule. So we have a nice brought Betsy Ann's from 21, 22, which are very meticulous and very long and accurate. And so in that sense, we need some kind of reflection in the rules for what's occurring with these rooms. And there's been a little ambiguity on a couple of the rooms. But the whole idea is so that historically people can see where the rooms have been assigned and who they're supposed to be using them. Because the last thing we want to do is have a conflict between the House and the Senate as to who's using what rooms. That's not good for you all, and that's honestly horrible for the staff. I mean, just that's my own self-interest, but it's horrible for everybody. So pre-COVID, COVID was 2020, maybe December 2019, as you know. Before that, there was some space limitations in this building. And the House had some real space limitations given the size of their committees. And there have been various potential build outs and reconfigurations of this building. And David Sheets can tell you, it goes back 20 or 30 years. I will not bore you with that. The history of some starts and stops to get more room. In 2019, I believe it was, there was some issues, as Speaker Johnson was here and there was Senator Ash was the pro tem. There was some issues with some quality in one of the rooms, and the House moved into the Ethan Allen room. To use. There's not really any formal meeting minutes on that. I mean, there's a discussion. It's the way it was and the way it's sort of been since then. In 2020, COVID hit. I'll tell you, it was horrible. For those of you who are here, you all know and you remember. Those was in March, It was February, was
March 13th.
well, there were two of them.
March 13th.
There was two of them because we met, then we took you guys met, then you took a break, we came back, and everybody was kind of remote, hoping for the very, very best. And then everybody was remote, other than mainly staff, and the Senate had their presiding officers, and the House and the Senate took slightly different approaches to work best for them. At the end of that session, the House's, there was some language in a budget, which allowed some flexibility as to where everybody met. The House and the Senate worked through it. There was talk about how it was all going to occur or not occur. But for 21, basically nobody was in the building still. And I gave you that as background to kind of know what happened next. There was an institutions committee and a few other people put together a plan to reopen the State House. And this committee, Speaker Kowinski was the chair at the time, 21-22. Betsy Ann Rask was clerk, and the clerk of this committee. As I say, she's kept great notes. As you may remember, those who are on there, she has this big spreadsheet. I brought them in case people want to look at them as decision tree, who had to do things, who didn't have to do things. That was the best times and it was the worst. And so there was a whole scheme done throughout 2021 and what was going to happen. And I can give you the decision tree. The House was basically responsible for House rooms. Joint Rules was responsible for common areas. Senate was responsible for Senate. House was responsible for House. Committee rooms were assigned. There was a mandatory mask. There was a mask policy that was supposed to be uniform, slightly different between the two, but the committee put some proposals together, same on attendance, and there's lots of planning. In that decision tree, one of the major issues that, from my perspective, as the current clerk, is that I'm not sure, there's no definitiveness as to where all the rooms went. There was grid 20. Grid 20 is Ethan Allen room, room 9, room 10, room 11. And those rooms, it was sort of uncertain. There's no definitive made by this rules committee. I can walk you through the grids on everything else. But those rooms appear from the records to not have been really decided by the rules committee. The last entry really on those is there was a discussion between the pro tem and speaker as to use for the coming session and the coming. And that's really the last thing that's in there that I can find. Okay. And that was pretty clear that it was for 21 and 22. But I wasn't in the room when speaker and the then pro tem spoke. I do know that one of the major considerations was HVAC and all sorts of other stuff. But there's really no rules that say what happened in this current session, but it's been going on. And however that happened to work, with room 10 and 11 with the House, room 9, which has been outfitted, used to be, as you know, the old.
Cool.
Do you have a question or okay? Okay.
Finish another.
Okay, so the room 9 was also used as a house room and continued to use East and out. So that has created some other issues for whether we staff or the public. I mean, you guys have to balance what's used for public rooms, what's used for house rooms. You have health concerns for health people. You have the house. Historically, as I say, the real issue is for the rules minutes. What I need is a vote on what you're doing with these rooms for 25, 26. And if you work through whatever your decision tree today is, I'm hoping that we get to sort of a decision is what's going to happen with not only the 4 rooms that are sort of, at least what I see as ambiguous, and potentially 2 new rooms that can be discussed by Agatha or by the architect. But I believe it's been presented to both the pro tem's office and the speaker's office, but I wasn't in either one of those, so I can't vouch for it. So that's sort of the overall decision tree. I can tell you from my perspective, to make this work, this book, I need a positive motion on what we're doing. Otherwise, it kind of defaults back to sort of the way it was. And the way it was is kind of without an agreement as to how these rooms are used. I tried to play it as straight down the middle because, as I say, we need to find a resolution from my perspective. And I have also tried to be very frank as we work through this and trying to accommodate what the House's needs are for their rooms. I will also say that my understanding is, and the House members can correct me, that when some of the shifting around was done, there are a couple rooms that the House, I think, are now joint rooms or can be used. There's one across from the elevator. I know I've done some meetings in there, but I don't know what's going on with the House, I'm going to call vacant rooms, or if they're still assigned to to the House. You may want to make a formal action on that too, because from here I can't tell. If those rooms, the intent of this Rules Committee is to make those be rooms that can be jointly used by the House and Senate for meetings. It would be nice if this little booklet said for some time in the future, when I'm not here or Betsy Ann's not here, and a new speaker and a new pro tem 10 years from now asks, we can give answers that are consistent based on this. And probably Betsy Ann will be here 10 years from now. I'm getting old. Senator Clark.
So, thank you, John. That's helpful, although we did make a decision, and I can't remember what the decision tree was on the lounge. So we have made a decision. So my question is, how did we make the decision on the lounge? And I had assumed that the lounge was the first room and that there were subsequent actions that were going to happen after that in terms of the other public rooms. But that was room one in terms of decisions. And so I just would love to be reminded of, because that was the first room we returned to public use, i.e. legislative,
So
entire legislative use.
I can only tell you what's in the book. So you're right, 2022. The lounge, I believe, was used as some committee rooms. 2024, I'm not sure I found it formally in here, but I can take a quick peek that, and I don't want to tell you it's definitely not in here because I don't remember seeing it. I was looking more back for the earlier time, but it is clear that it went back. This committee, joint rules, Senator Clarkson Brock may have been on it in 2020. We were meeting every day. It was horrible. They just said, because way back, like, when you were doing the 2021, 22, working through getting it reopened, you were meeting about once a month. And since I've taken back over, I think we've met twice. So I just, once each year, once to elect people, and then there was some discussion on what to do. So there's very little in the last 2 years, to be honest, whether that's, some of the stuff has been changed over time. Sometimes this committee looked at stuff that joint management does, which is management. I mean, the speaker and the pro tem have always been involved in that, but sometimes things came to this committee, especially when the sergeant at arms was more under it. You also now have a human resource. All this is relatively recent, which is got some other work out. But I can, while you discuss, I will take a look through, and it would probably be sometime in October, November of 22, if there's anything in here.
And I can say in terms of returning it to public use, when I came in as pro tem or was coming in, we did talk with the House, and we worked out that room would go back to
Right, I
legislative use.
remember that.
And so I don't believe that there was a rules committee decision on that. It just.
Yeah, I just remember making our case for doing it.
Yeah,
And I can't remember the decision making
No, they
piece.
were all informal conversations.
Well, and some of them are much more informal. There's a note in October 22, last one from Betsy. And it basically says that there was discussion on items number 9 through 14, which she says, see spreadsheet. It's all color coordinated. That was the card room. There was a big discussion of whether you're going to open up the card room for use or not. There's stuff about sidebars, no change. You'll remember some of these. Cedar Creek room, press conferences versus not press conferences. Numbers 12, scheduling press conferences. Number 13, large press conferences. And we're going to move them to State Street still. There's number 9 related to no change. On 11, I'll see limiting school tours back then. I mean, I hope we never have to do it. Yeah, I just want to check and see what 11 and 14 are. But this was the spreadsheet that Betsy Ann was using for the last House clerk was using for the last meeting. Number 14 was groups and tours. I'm trying to see if there's anything on. It's
All familiar.
Legislative meeting.
Representative Flores.
While you're looking, I just wanted to go to some comments you made about the smaller rooms that the House typically had for space for committee rooms. And when COVID, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about those rooms, including the one across the elevator that you were talking about. Those were all committee rooms, and we knew for many, many years they were not healthy rooms and they were tiny rooms. But that became very evident during air quality testing. And I just want to make sure that we're really all on the same page, and anybody who's paying attention to this, that the air quality testing was appalling, not just in those tiny interior rooms in the, there's 4 of them, but also in some other spaces in the building. So I just want to make sure that we're all aware that there really was some challenge to ever going back into those rooms, which meant that the future was going to look different no matter what, from my perspective. Because we were not going to be able to go back into those tiny rooms with the air quality. And so it was going to be a bigger conversation. And so I just wanted to put that out on the table and appreciate the work that has been done since then.
Well, and I would agree with just about everything you say. So certainly during COVID, they couldn't be social distancing we were doing. We have been told by the BGS folks, Commissioner Fitch, that there is not a health issue to returning to those rooms. There's a proximity component to that, how people feel in the room that is taken into account now as opposed to maybe pre-COVID. So I think there is some dispute about whether one committee or another might go into one of those rooms. But let me just say, I understand that the House doesn't want to go back to those rooms. And so the plan that we're hopefully going to be talking about does not put the House back in those rooms. I just don't want to sign on to the idea that it's unhealthy to have a committee in there because there is some dispute about whether that's the case.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And I just want to add for greater context, because some of you are on JLMC and some of you aren't, that out of that conversation, we've been starting what is the long-term vision for renovating the State House to make it more accessible, to be more ADA compliant, to have more appropriate space for us to do our work. And so right now we're doing it in phases, and phase 1 is around mitigation, ADA compliance issues, doing the entryway to have one formal entryway. So we're starting that work, and then there'll be another phase. So this is one question that's part of just a larger, bigger conversation about the building and its future.
Yeah, and what we're talking about really is the time-sensitive component, getting public rooms back to the public and to general access, House and Senate, by the start of next session. So the ADA compliant piece that we've sort of half authorized, that's going to be a couple of years in playing out. But to the Senate's point of view, we can't go on any longer with the public rooms not accessible by the public. So that's what we're trying to limit ourselves.
Right. No, I totally understand. I just want to make sure that everyone knows that this is there's a whole project happening about the future of the building and the space.
Certainly.
No, and some of us are quite excited about it and wish it was doing more sooner. But anyway, the really 5 rooms. There's 2 up and down, and then there's room, whatever it's called. 41. 41. I love meeting in that room, actually. And that's the one that's across from the elevator. But is the HVAC system with that room also still, I mean, I'm just curious, because that is one of our small public rooms. We've had a lot of good smaller committee meetings in there. I love that room. So is that still an HVAC challenge, that room?
Well, I feel like we need to look at the updated information and data. I haven't seen it.
But not for a full committee, but it's still one of our swinging public rooms.
Let me call on Senator Kitchell. Jane, you had a question?
I did. I'm kind of relating this conversation to the money that we put in the budget, recognizing that within the time frame, because obviously we took the first phase of modifications to the State House to deal with safety and ADA compliance, and that is how we can take what exists now and modify it for committee use so that it does have more adequate space. And I think I don't have the plan, so I just want to get back to if we are obviously there's strong view that public space, and what we had to do during COVID and subsequent to that has been less than desirable to not have that public availability. But does the plan that you referenced deal with maybe some conversion and use of vacant space now, like in the mezzanine area and so forth, that could be adapted? Is that part of our, I just need some clarification. To what extent do we have some alternatives to freeing up the rooms that historically have been used for public activities, both House and Senate, and what we could do to develop adequate committee space for the House committees, which are a bit larger than was the case pre-COVID even. So it's more a clarification of this discussion, but it's sort of how do we, if we can come to agreement to make the traditional rooms that were public again, how do we get adequate space needs met in other areas of the building?
That's right, Jane. So what I'm hoping by the close of this meeting is that we could have agreement to return 10 and 11 to public use and general Senate House use, which prior to COVID, that was the way it worked. With that, Agatha can present a plan for the mezzanine to create 2 committee rooms there. If, let's say, the House were to retain possession of the Ethan Allen room, room 9, and the 2 new rooms on the mezzanine, conceivably, we could be done by January and our work would be finished. So that's the time-sensitive component. But what, in some sense, what's been holding us up is the question of which room should be returned to the public. And so maybe it's best to ask the House, what are your thoughts on, can 10 and 11 go, can we agree that they go back to their previous pre-COVID uses? If so, then we can use the last half an hour of this for the plan, the architectural drawings, et cetera.
Well, I don't think our members have heard I think hearing from Agatha would be helpful to get a full understanding of what we're
Yep.
talking about before having a conversation, because
Okay.
we haven't been having these conversations.
All right, I was under the impression that you guys had seen those.
One question relative to the air quality. So has there been an update to the air quality in the rooms that I am not aware of?
I'm not, Agatha, do you guys, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but the HVAC, you have an answer on the HVAC or?
It hasn't been, the units haven't been updated for
Okay.
that way. It's actually, they're waiting for,
I think.
the understanding of the scope of work to come forward. And I'm Tricia Harper, I'm a consultant for the facilities coordinator for the legislature. So anyway, they're waiting to come forward with the next, this is an interim solution, the mezzanine committee rooms, and until the next project of working and putting these life safety measures in, the ADA access and such like that. So how far that project's gonna go will affect the HVAC configuration ducts, but otherwise the air is getting increased. Rooms that will be affected by this work by the HVAC work is the ducts are gonna get bigger. So the walls are gonna get wider, or they're gonna have to burr out the walls more in room 33 and which was corrections, and then above 33 is transportation 43.
I hope Agatha, you'll correct me. This may sound kind of weird, but there's a project on HVAC, as you all know, that's out back. And my understanding is it's held up until you decide what to do with the mezzanine. That they can't go forward because they have to make adjustments to the HVAC depending on what you all decide on the mezzanine. Now, that may be wrong, but that's my understanding is one of the reasons the houses can't be completed is until you all decide what happens on the mezzanine. And that may or may not be 100% correct, but that's what I believe.
So
Okay, so what my next question, because you're in 33 and 43, are those rooms in effect getting smaller? Okay, so that's gonna affect the size of the committee room that can go in there and how many individuals can sit in that room at any one particular time.
That's correct. Those spaces, I believe, are being used as wellness rooms now. Correct me if I'm-
You're talking about the small rooms, not the
Yeah.
transportation meeting.
Yeah,
So
are they in there right now?
transportation is in room 43.
Oh, they are.
I'm on transportation.
Okay, sorry.
Part of that is not one.
Oh,
So it's not that number.
And
Right,
that
it's not.
total number.
that's that little
Right,
arrow
right.
room and it's,
It's ways and
it used to have it used to be wildlife, didn't it? Fish from wildlife?
Yes.
Oh, it's not 40.
Yeah, it had a bear.
That's correct.
Remember?
In other words, they're the rooms, they are the rooms that are expected not to return as house committee.
Oh, the one that we talked about.
Correct.
Okay, maybe
Correct.
good idea at this point to ask Agatha to give us some of that. Agatha, you want to do your PowerPoint?
Yes, thank you.
And I did send that mezzanine picture to.
great.
If you want.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I'm Agatha Kessler, Sergeant at Arms. So just kind of back to those middle rooms that we were just talking about. There are options for those rooms. They could be, walls could be taken down, rooms could be combined. There are options. So the fate of those rooms is unknown. It ties to the future project, which there's lots of names for the project of expansion or mitigation or addition. They all mean the same thing. So, but right now, and I've phoned a friend to Janet to ask what the occupancy standards are for all of those rooms that are in question, those 5 rooms. 41, 33, 32, 47, and 44 are those 5 rooms that are no longer committee rooms. So we'll get the occupancy standards, and also have asked when the last time air quality tests were performed in those rooms. Thank you.
That's cool.
So, thank you, Chrissy. So, I'm prepared to talk about the public space project. This identifies the mezzanine as an area where we could create new committee rooms. So, Chrissy, if you wouldn't mind the next slide, this slide just lays out the language that was in the budget bill that gives the authority for 4 legislators, the speaker, the pro tem, and the chairs of the appropriations committees to authorize the use of legislative carry forward to identify areas in the building that could be used for public space within the State House. And so during session, I think shortly after town meeting, I engaged with Freeman French Freeman. They're an architect that has done lots of projects in the building. They're very knowledgeable about the building, and worked with Trisha, our consultant with BGS, to develop ideas. Where could 2 new committee rooms go? And the idea was to find space equivalent to or approximately equivalent to House Judiciary, the size of House Judiciary. So anywhere between 450 and 550 square feet. And it is very hard to find that kind of space in the State House. So we looked in several areas, but quickly we landed on the mezzanine. So Chrissy, if you would mind the next slide. Now I will say that as with any of these projects, there are certain sensitivities. We all know that the mezzanine is where legislative council is. My understanding is that the legislative council staff know that this conversation is happening. But it is, sensitive. They've been on that floor for many, many years. That floor has not been renovated in many, many years. And if you visited it recently or even long ago, it's the same as it always was. So it's kind of prime for renovation. It would make renovation challenging in lots of ways, but we do feel as though we've spoken to the architects, to the mechanical engineers, to potential contractors that this project, if everything goes well, would be achievable by January 1st of 2025. Now, that's not to say it will happen, but if things fall into place, it can be achieved in time. It is achievable. So the slide you see before you shows the mezzanine. So I'll start with on the left side, that would be an 11-person committee room, about 464 square feet. It would eliminate what is a bathroom there right now and 3 offices, 3 staff offices. So that would become it could become an 11-person committee room. You have to relocate the restroom. Those are the pink squares. Those are 2 single-use restrooms, one of which would be ADA compliant. Then on the right-hand side is another 11-person committee room. And 4 or 5, excuse me, touchdown spaces. That's what TD stands for. So those are existing single-use offices where lawyers are sitting right now. And we see that there could be a purpose for leaving them exactly the way that they are, unassigned space or potentially assigned space, because there's a ripple effect of this whole project. I think it's fair to say this project would affect every single staff office with the exception of the House Clerk and the Senate Secretary. HR would be affected, operations would be affected. I don't think IT would be affected. The lawyers would be affected, JFO would be affected. So right now they're unassigned spaces. They could be assigned spaces based on what the ripple effect is of the project, but certainly some would be unassigned, which would be a space where lawyers could touch down if they're now moved off-site. They would have a spot where they could touch down for a few hours, a spot where they could meet with members. There's lots of potential for those touchdown spaces. I believe that covers most. It would be locked space. So if you walked up I'll just kind of take on a virtual tour, is if you walked up the steps to the mezzanine now, you would enter a hallway. The hallway would include a window. We didn't want the hallway to be very narrow. So the hallway would include a window. And to the right, there'd be a door that leads you to that right committee room. On the left would be a hallway that brings you to the left committee room. If you took a right, you would eventually go down that hallway, which would lead to a locked door. So that would keep that back space. That would not be public space. Those would be those private offices. So there's lots of details to this project, but that's the essential overview.
And the thought for Ledge Council was that 2 Aiken could be a place where Ledge Council would be unified under one roof.
Exactly. 2 Aiken has been fully renovated. My understanding is that it used to be where BGS was. It transferred to the legislature and has been fully renovated. Trisha's been in charge of that project. We have a fire inspection on July 10th, which hopefully everyone keep your fingers crossed, on July 10th will be the day that we will pass the test to get a certificate of occupancy.
Representative.
Thank you. It's so hard to tell on a blueprint about comparing sizes.
Yes.
So those are both 11-person ICUs, specifically say 11-person committee rooms. We have a number of committees that are 12. And so I'm assuming that it's saying 11 because of the limited space. So I'm trying to compare the size of either of those. I see the square footage, but what's the square footage of like this room? What's the square footage of any of our, just rough?
So 500, the bigger one on the right is 540 square feet. That's about House Judiciary. And I'm gonna ask Trisha, if you wouldn't mind, the 464, if you could find the next closest committee room, that's 460 square feet as a comparison. And I don't know the square footage of this room, but we can find that out. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Representative Lamb.
Windows.
Yes.
Can we talk
Windows.
about the windows?
Windows. So, in terms of where are they?
Yes, and
Yes.
how many and the access to daylight?
So on the right-hand side, or this committee room right here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 windows. And this would overlook the courtyard. So I think probably everyone's been to Michael Chernick's office.
I was just gonna think of.
This is his window right here. And then in this committee room, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 windows. And then the hallway itself has 1 window here. The original design was to have actually a narrower hallway and a bigger bathroom, but I opted for a wider hallway with a window and a smaller bathroom.
Yeah, especially if there's a power gas.
Yes, yes.
Just but noting that those windows open into a hallway, interior, those two.
Those are interior,
The-
the stairs.
Yeah, there's the bathroom
This
one,
one, yes.
that one, and then the 2 to the left.
Yes.
They're opening to the inside,
The
not
inside.
the outside.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Rep. Kernsky.
So As someone who's been through large construction projects, I have a little PTSD about schedules and them being kept on target. So could you just talk a little bit more about, there are things that we don't know could happen that could, that are out of our control, but obviously it feels a little ambitious, but it sounds like, you've been doing a lot of work to suss this out. So if you could just talk a little bit about the timeline.
Yes, absolutely. We have done some preliminary work, what's reasonable and acceptable because the project has not been approved, but so we've done some preliminary testing. I can happily report that there is no asbestos in the area. I can happily report that the air handler, that is going to be the biggest, it's potential that will be the showstopper on the whole thing, is buying the air handler. And this is how it ties to the bigger HVAC project. So those cranes that are in the front of the State House, they're pulling air handlers out of the crow's nest, and I believe there's 12 air handlers in total in the building. And so they're being pulled out and replaced in phases. And so the original HVAC project had air handlers, and I'm talking about BGS's work right now, so I hope I get it right, and I'll go back to BGS to make sure I'm getting this right, but they had something, lined up to order for the mezzanine as offices for the lawyers. Now, this would be a different air handler that they would purchase, and so the lead time on that air handler is 4 months. My understanding, these are very complex units and you can't buy them off the shelf. So they take a long time to come in. So we would still be able to pull this off if we had a green light for the project relatively soon. We would be able to get that air handler in that would be able to handle this new occupancy, which could be around 50 people. So I think the question was about time restrictions. So it's the air handler. I think save some time because there does not have to be any asbestos abatement. We want to put this project out to bid in terms of not the formal sense of the out to bid, but we'd like to shop around and make sure we're getting the best price from contractors. So that will take some time. But we have people that do work in the building. We've kind of spoken to them offline unofficially about the project. So we've been gearing up as if this project is going to happen. So our ducks, so to speak, are in a row. The pieces that will become out of our control are the supply chain parts. And we've identified that the air handler is the biggest piece of the supply chain. So this project has been described as ambitious, but possible. Does that answer your question, Speaker? Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Thanks, Agatha. What's the price tag on this?
So the construction piece is around 600,000. And then there could be up to an extra 75,000 to 100,000 in the design and construction administration and engaging with the engineers. The mezzanine is incredibly complex from a mechanical perspective. So there's a lot of planning that needs to be done with engineers to make sure that it's done correctly.
So you can see it's working from the idea that the House didn't want to go back to the original committee rooms. Planning began for this. So it's based on the House's clear intention not to go back to the rooms. So
It's not that we wouldn't want to. I miss the kitchen. I miss
Well,
having windows, but I do think, I don't know if we don't want to. I don't know where can we go that's healthy?
Let me put it in more neutral terms. So based on the idea that the House would not be returning to those rooms, where would the House go to free up the public rooms? So that's where this design comes from. That's where this plan comes from. So I view this plan as trying to work in cooperation with what the House needs. The only thing at this point that the Senate is concerned with, we're not concerned about, because what this plan would, if you think about it, what this plan would involve is a net gain of rooms for the House from what it had before. Probably some of the rooms that you won't be returning to as committee rooms would be available for other uses. but you would have two new rooms, larger rooms, and you would have the Ethan Allen room and room 9. So the only thing that the Senate has been insistent about is that 10 and 11 go back to public use. If we have that, we're willing to sign on to this, to the expense involved, and work as, efficiently as we can to get it done. So what our side is looking for from the House is that we'll go back to pre-COVID use with 10 and 11, and then we will work together on moving the house into new spaces that are bigger than the old spaces. And
So I guess my first question is, is the HVAC completed for the current space the house has?
No.
No. So how does this project affect fixing what we already have that we've been waiting for years, that the Senate's HVAC is done, but we're still waiting?
That's correct.
And that's my concern.
That's the next phase. Or it's.
Oh, so we're being bumped back again. The rooms that are
It
not,
was always, you were always phased in this order, I believe.
oh, so when is our HVAC finally going to be done in the rooms that we currently use?
2026 is the plan.
2026.
Yeah. I'll double check, but that is what I've heard. It's a BGS project, but 2026. And this project, the public space project, doesn't necessarily interrupt any of that. It's just that it's like building a house with Legos, and like the mezzanine piece of the Lego just changed from like a blue to a yellow piece. So it's still being built in accordance with the schedule. The schedule has not been interrupted.
Okay, but you are going to take parts of some walls of some rooms that the house currently has.
Yes.
And those are the rooms that are currently used as open, general space for people if they
Swing
need to take a meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
Senator Kitchell, you have your hand up?
Well, I do. I've been around long enough to know things take a lot of time. And so I think the addition of more committee rooms, I felt that the mezzanine had greater potential. The one thing, knowing timing, and January is aggressive, I think we need to always have the understanding that if there's slippage, I would not want to spend another day in room 11. I think that's dark, it's depressing, et cetera. We talk about quality. I mean, I see this as sort of an improvement. I think, and it is certainly as an expenditure, but I don't think it's wasted, because I think that the space will have utility for a lot longer than maybe we anticipate. So I think that this is actually better space in many regards than we had to do on a temporary basis. So I hope that from my perspective, I think the plan as it's been presented to us today is worthy of support. And I think, in fact, it gives us greater utility for existing space. And I know that while phase 1 is not that far away, more than that, depending on money and so forth, things have a lot, we know can take a lot longer than we like. So that's just my perspective. I'm not going to be there to enjoy that room, but that corner suite, Diane, I would
You're
take it in
welcome.
a heartbeat.
You are always welcome, madam. You may come as a witness. No.
There was just one part of the mezzanine project I failed to mention, which, and Representative Lanford, you reminded me, is there is plans to have a little, it's not a kitchenette, but a sink where a microwave and a fridge could go, right outside of the bathrooms.
The height of the ceilings, not,
Yes.
because that's an air quality piece as well as.
I believe they're 8 feet on the mezzanine. I'd have to. double
8
check.
feet?
Yeah, no, there is about, there's less than that.
Less than 8.
Less than 8 feet?
Yeah, there's 7 foot. That's 5, yeah.
I mean, not that low, but.
This room is 700 square feet.
Oh.
Okay, so, and then the largest existing room that you have is, in committee rooms is, like, education is 340. And appropriations 340.
Sorry.
The old. Those are the old.
The old rooms.
Your old ones.
Yeah,
The old rooms.
yeah. When they were back in 21,
Pre-COVID times, yeah.
or just, just post. Yeah, so is that all you need?
Representative Currency.
So, so as someone who's been deep into the plans and the mitigation and the renovations, as chair at JLMC with our ongoing work, like, for me personally, this isn't the order I would have liked to do this in, because we're putting money towards a temporary project and not towards the larger picture of where we want to go. But I understand that there are additional space pressures that we have, and we have been using the pavilion for meetings, and I don't know if we're going to have that space in January, and that changes. That's another dynamic that we haven't talked about yet that is a challenge for us, right? So we're in this place where we need to find some sort of transition to get us there. So I'm reluctant about the timing of this with the process, but not having staff be more involved in this. But I feel like we're running out of options if this is what is happening. And I think it'll bring us some additional thoughts and processes for JLMC as we start working on the next round. But I know that those rooms up in the 30s and 40s, those small rooms, I think everybody has been thinking like those are just going to go away and those committee rooms are going to get larger. So there's a lot of moving pieces here that we have to be thinking about.
You mentioned the possibility that, of course, this may not be done on time and that the pavilion might not be available. And so the question is, there needs to be some kind of a contingency plan so that in the event the construction, assuming we go ahead with this, isn't done on time, then what? Has that been thought through? Well, I have thought about it, talking with Agatha as well. So as long as the Rules Committee has determined that 10 and 11 are going back to public use, and we have this plan and the timeline is January 2025, if the construction takes an additional month or an additional 2 months, or God forbid to town meeting day, then it seems to me that under those circumstances, I would be fine with the committee staying in the rooms until the new rooms are finished. That seems to me part of normal give and take. But I wouldn't want to have it slip another year because we made this arrangement with the onset of COVID. We're 4 years out, these rooms have left public use for 4 years. I don't want it to be 5. So, but, if there's slippage due to, this or that reason, and it turns out that it's, a month later or 2 months later, then certainly the Senate can live with that. But what I'm really crediting Agatha with, she's done an amazing job putting this plan together, but also I think it is possible that it can be done by January. And if that's the case, then I think it's better for everybody involved. That's my feeling.
So going back to something that Speaker Kronsky just mentioned about the pavilion and the lack of use is also, I don't know the reason why, but we have been making a lot of use out of the pavilion. And if the project isn't able to move on time, as you just described, will we still have access to the pavilion, or are we going to find out now that we will not have access to the pavilion?
So, I have to say it was a failure of mine that we don't have the pavilion. I did not realize or recognize that reservation is made through legislation. So, I may need to call on legislative leadership to help put together an MOU or something with the Secretary of Administration or the executive branch to get. So it's not foreclosed that we can't have it, but traditionally it has been secured through legislation. So, and I didn't even realize that until recently. So it's not, so I may need some support in having those conversations. But I'm sure they're eager to get those rooms back as well. So we could still have access. It's to be determined.
And then I just have a question on, I forgot the wording that we have in the budget, that what money are we using? And since the two appropriation chairs are here, will we have enough money to fund this?
Well, Frank, I can give you the first part. The first part is the committee's made up of the two appropriations chairs, the speaker and the pro tem. The language includes using surplus funds. And then the amount and whether there's enough, I believe there is, but I have Catherine sitting next to me who can give you a better answer than joint fiscal.
Okay, then I guess I have a second. What other bills did we pass that were, if there's money available, we will do? Do we have a sense of how much that was? And then how much this is going to be? Because I know we passed a lot of bills that didn't have money attached to them, but they need money. So
So I'm Catherine Bennett from the Joint Fiscal Office. Are you talking about, there's a contingent list in the budget, which is a separate issue.
Okay.
We're talking about what you've got in the legislative budget. So the contingent list for the general fund was a
Okay.
whole list of things.
Okay.
And I believe that list will be fully funded, but we don't know till the year closes.
Okay.
It was 114 million. That is one discussion, general fund, big picture. The legislative budget, the things that would, in my mind, cost would be committee meetings that we can do per diems for. I only know of one right now that we have that didn't have, that we weren't anticipating, and we have, we expect sometimes that's gonna happen, so we have money, and you have some money left also over, from COVID, we've been saving some money, and especially in light of the bigger project that you're doing. So you have the money that.
So how much money do we have on hand then in this legislative budget?
Oh, you have, I'm not gonna, I wish Scott was here. I would say it is just in the legislative budget, trying to think about this, we reserved 1.6 for State House, and then we've reserved other things for like the DM project, for other carry forward projects, so I'm a little hesitant to tell you because I don't know how those projects are gonna get spent down. But we reserved 1.6 for State
Out of
House
surplus monies?
yes.
Okay.
It's not for,
It's not the contingent.
it's not the contingent list. This is
Okay.
in our budget that we have, that we carry forward. This is the legislative budgets.
Okay.
So, and I expect when you get to the full bigger project, that will require some additional appropriations, but the point has been to have some of these funds available for whatever you all choose to do for State House.
Excuse me.
Representative Lang.
So thank you. So I appreciate it and thank you for letting me be as vocal. I'm not a typical member of this committee, so I apologize for taking up some of the airtime and what you guys have already done. I at this point think, we have this long-term plan and that I think most people would find that the historic nature of this building, we all do, we cherish these rooms, and to return them to public, I think the question that the committee is going to be wrestling with is the timing and under what conditions can that happen that is appropriate for everybody's health and use. And so I would say that everybody is looking forward to returning as much as possible to the pre-COVID time with all the adjustments that need to happen.
Well, and
It's
to
timing, yeah.
the timing piece, you've heard 3 or 4 different ways of expressing until we decide time has stopped, which means that projects cannot be done within a certain time frame. So not acting is making a decision to not do these and to continue to inhibit some of the other projects. So that was why when we announced the meeting, we added time sensitive to it.
So it would be my thinking then that I think everybody's on the same page, that we're all anxious to get through to the next level of where the State House is going to go. It's just, I would want to have the sensitivity around depending on what is the barrier and to be ready for the unknowns that pop up that may throw barriers into timing and issues and things we don't even know yet.
Sure.
But we look forward to it.
Well, Lynn, I think John had in mind a couple of different motions. And if you want to run those out and see which.
Okay. Thanks. So I think there are two different main motions. It all depends on how you want to vote, honestly. But there are two motions that need to be eventually made. The first one is whether or not that sort of, I'm not sure it's a special committee. The committee of the speaker, the pro tem, and the two appropriations chairs approve the project that Agatha put up. And that's really those four people's decision. I think it's all part of the same contingency to make sure everything works. The second one really is assigning the rooms to the house use and however they see fit. Whether or not that involves windows to appropriations or the Fish and Wildlife, whatever, that's the speaker in the House Rules Committee. It'd be really nice to have that sort of in the book. I can give you language that does that. What I've been sensing though is that the strict language is a little maybe scary, for lack of a better term. And by that I mean, what I would probably first do with the motion is that rooms, they would do the building project, that going forward, the rooms 10 and 11 are going to go back to public use. I think that happens unless you figure a motion today to give them to the House, the way I read the minutes. And then assigning probably the two new rooms, room 9 and the Ethan Allen room, unless I haven't heard any objection, once again, so that there's something in here that makes it. You can include within that or a statement that explains the record, something like that's the motion that's carrying, with the understanding that if there's complications, it'll be reconsidered at another joint rules meeting before January 1st. It's a little funky to put something into the motion, but we can do it. I just need to know what sense is before I give you exact language. And I think you could do it room by room, but I really think for this group, it's better to do it as a package. Because I think everybody understands what they're voting for rather than have it kind of break down somewhere along the line.
I think what's important to me in the motion is that we're clear that if the rooms are not ready, that we stay in these rooms. So there's no confusion, like that we know there's a plan A and a plan B.
And I could just add to that would include the use of the pavilion. So, and I know we can't say right today whether we'll be able to access that or not, but it seems important to me that we would have that space if we are still, not having meeting space in this building.
Well, and there are lots of inconveniences for lots of groups that we're talking about. So one of the ways I look at it is the committees that have occupied the rooms on this hall have had extremely spacious rooms for 4 years. But everyone else not on those committees has been inconvenienced. So House members who aren't on those committees haven't been able to reserve them or use them. Senate members, the public, everybody's been inconvenienced for 4 years. So if there's some inconvenience in the next year for these 3 committees, then that's unfortunate, but it would be the first time they've been inconvenienced to my way of thinking. So to the pavilion question, we would still have the committees in 10 and 11. And if there's a hang up and it's going to be several more months, we could do pretty much what we've been doing now, which is occasionally having somebody meet in when the committee isn't in the room, or using the legislative lounge or other spaces. But for us, the companion things are that we have a schedule and 10 and 11 is returning, and then there's work to create the new rooms with a little bit of flexibility for if that work isn't done. But let me just go to the speaker to make sure we.
So are you saying that in January, if the rooms aren't ready in the mezzanine and committees are meeting, that you want to expand the scope of who can use it?
No, I'm just saying if I believe we'll be able to get access to the pavilion.
Okay.
So I don't think that will be an issue. But let's say that the pavilion doesn't exist. Groups like the Republican caucus in the House, they need a space. We will figure it out. We'll at that point, we'll reconvene and figure out where to put those groups. I don't know what that solution would look like. We're talking about contingencies on contingencies at that point.
For sure.
But all I'm trying to say is that the Senate will be flexible as long as we've said that January is the target, and we are agreed on that. If it's a month more, 2 months more, town meeting day even, we can make that work, and then everybody's on one page that when the work is done, we're transitioning. Also, we could be doing the transition for Ledge Council in the meanwhile. So they don't need to necessarily wait until the committee work is done. In fact, they can't. So the project could be going forward, and the motion would make clear that there's some flexibility for when the project can be completed.
So it strikes me that all of this is dependent on two things at the moment. One is the negotiation with the administration on the pavilion. The second is the occupancy certificate for 2 Aiken, right? Because that's still not set. So it strikes me that our motion needs to be contingent on at least that, because we don't have any place to put Ledge Council. If 2 Aiken is not, I was ready to move in there for the whole session as an alternative place to sleep. Janet didn't like that idea, but I hadn't realized we hadn't gotten a full, because HR's over there, so I thought we had occupancy.
Partial occupancy, and the thing is that we've been trying to have the contractor finish up the new fire doors within the building, so it's based on the approval of those new fire doors,
So does that,
I think we're done.
yeah, I do too. So are we ready for motion?
I just wanted to add a couple little things. So,
Senator Kitchell has her hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Let me take Senator Kitchell, and then I'll go back to you, Joan. Jane?
No, I'm ready. I don't want to hold up a motion because I have to leave to be in St. J at 12:30.
Okay.
I do think that the use of the pavilion almost is a separate issue that we're going to have to accommodate as it evolves in terms of not move. I'm not moving in terms of the proposal that Agatha and folks have presented to us today. I think, yeah, I would concur that we recognize things don't always end up exactly, and certainly would support the understanding that if it goes beyond January, work is underway, that's understandable, and we should recognize it and support it and allow for it.
Mr. Secretary, and then I'll go to you.
Yes.
What I was going to say is I 100% agree with Senator Kitchell. So the problem is, I don't think today you can control the pavilion. I think one of the major problems is if you put this off today, the project can't really go forward for the mezzanine until it's approved. If it's not approved, everything, including the air handling in the house, gets backed up. And I don't know how to make the motion contingent on something that you can't control because it involves the administration. So I don't know how to even begin to draft that and make it.
I agree. I think that's a separate.
And don't conflate it.
Pamela?
I was just gonna say, it wasn't my intent to have that in the motion,
Yeah, I see.
but that we are proceeding with the plan to try to, because honestly, you mentioned several times about inconvenience. It is actually inconvenient to be in the pavilion in many, many ways. So I want to say that this is not about convenience. This is about actual meeting space for people who absolutely need to hold meetings. And some of them are large groups like my own. So I just want to make sure that whatever we proceed today with, it is with the concept that we will try to maintain that space. I know, I recognize what we have to go through to be able to negotiate with the administration, but I want to make sure that that's on the table.
Absolutely.
Continue to do that, not to put it in the motion today, because I recognize we can't control it.
Excellent.
So I've been communicating with BGS during the course of this meeting, and they are willing to hold, to work with us on the use of the pavilion.
That's what I want.
Perfect.
So I have very awkward, because I don't know how to make this unawkward language, but I did have one question before I kind of read what I have. There are two things. So at the very end, I'm making an adjustment, sort of saying that the rooms are coming back in 2025, but it's going to be contingent. And then, so I think from the Senate's perspective, Senate wants them back in 2025, but with a potential adjustment. The second thing I do need is I put in here, I don't know what the Speaker in the House want for how these rooms are assigned. So I've started by saying they're assigned for the coming session. I don't know if the House wants something different. So I put down for the session 2025 and 2026. I don't know if that's helpful to you all or harmful to you all with the potential that there's going to be another. I just think that that should be clear in the records, whether it is forever and a day or whether it's for a session pending. I just.
John, when you say the rooms, which rooms do you mean?
I have down as rooms 9, Ethan Allen, and the 2 new rooms on the mezzanine going to the house for 25, 26. I don't want that to become a sticking point when I read it if the house is expecting it to say something different. But because I think it can say whatever the house really needs, and maybe you want them more permanently assigned, or whether you may not want them.
We don't need to put names. I would just say like house rules would assign whether it's commerce or GovOps, right? We don't need to get into the names at all. That's not for us. That's a different group that does those. I'm curious, like we have, because there's ongoing work being done, if we want to say for 25,
No.
you want to say 25, 26?
I have your 2 rooms, I'm sorry, I have 2 things going on. I have these 2 rooms coming back in 2025.
Yes.
Actually, it's January 1st. I didn't say that, but it's going to be coming back, kind of contingent on the construction.
Right.
I have the other 2, all the other 4 rooms
Mhm,
going to you for the full session,
mhm.
is the way this is currently written. And I just want to make sure I let you know that before I read it and have somebody say, I was under a different impression.
We don't, I think, John, is there any way that we can,
Mhm.
look?
Chrissy,
Technologically.
can you do me a favor? Can you bring up a Word document? And then I'm going to come over here and type that, and I'm going to have you put it on the screen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was immediately.
If I was in my classroom, we would use the doc cam.
Oh, no, you don't want to read my.
So I think, given that we have a larger renovation project going on. Oh, sure. I think what the secretary talked about in terms of authorizing the rooms through the next biennium to be revisited makes sense, given that we're looking at adding more space. And at that point, we might want to make different determinations about. So for instance, the Senate is losing the Ethan Allen room, which we were wont to use for different committee purposes, et cetera. So ideally, if the State House gets expanded in phase 2, we would be able to get a little more space for us to use. So I guess what I would support is room 10 and 11 going back January 1st, 2025, but the House being given access to those 4 rooms through January 2027. Does that make sense? And then,
And if something happens, we can always come back and revisit this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. We're nothing if not flexible.
Except where it comes to the Senate chamber and the
House
half of the
chamber.
day, that you guys don't use your room.
Yeah.
Like, we could talk about that. You
well,
could double up, we could use some of your rooms.
And our double up has been quite successful.
Yes, it has. And I think that we should revisit that at some point because there's empty space all day, a half a day in 9 rooms of the State House.
so that when we were doing, I think it was phase 3, the one that had a new floor being built, then everybody's space problems were solved. That's in the distant future, I think.
I would also mention about the Ethan Allen room. I believe we occupied that with a committee prior to COVID.
You did. Yeah.
Because of their problems in that room.
Yeah.
I just wanted to note that it wasn't COVID that we took that room over.
But-
We took that room over because the other room was
It's-
unsafe.
Yes,
Yeah.
but again, there wasn't an authorization going.
I'm not aware that whether there was or wasn't an authorization. I just know it was a different reason why we
Yeah.
moved out of that committee room upstairs.
Yeah, because I don't know why Tony
It was.
took it over when he did.
No, we have
Because he was
some
doing
issues.
We had, we had carbon monoxide in that room, period, of too high level to actually be safely.
Is that why Tony left it in the first?
Mhm.
That's why we
Yeah.
changed the loading dock and trucks can't drive all the way back there because
Yeah, Senate
in that room.
problems, but nobody moved us. It was like, you guys are dead to me.
Well, hold on.
Yes,
Mr.
Jane?
Chair, I need to,
So
do you need my vote? I need to be in the
Yes.
same J.
We
So,
need you, we need your vote.
all right,
And
Okay.
the Senate Secretary is just finishing his typing.
oh, great.
So Chrissy will bring it up on the screen now, Jane.
All right, thank you.
Okay, there's some typos here.
Chrissy will fix them.
I wanted to, hate to get in the middle of all this, but I wanted to address a couple of issues. Most of the Senate rooms are substantially smaller than any of the rooms the House has. I'm not sure you could do 10, you could move 11 or 12 people in there. I know that's been an issue. I also, I sound like a homework here on the Senate, but there are used, we don't have just morning or afternoon committees. They can meet anytime during the day, even though we only use them sort of for half. But I think you're going to find for most of your committees, they're actually too small for a number of them, but that would be a engineering thing. Yeah, you perfect. Look at that.
Okay, are you looking for a motion?
Would you like to make the motion,
I
Jane?
was.
I would love to move, as stated. I think it captures our understanding.
Okay. I'll say it looks good to me. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
I don't know.
Senator Clark?
So I just hate to say this, but 2025-2026 is a biennium, not a session.
That's fine.
Good point.
Session.
Representing Glenn?
Is this just the four of us? Because we have.
It's a-
And then there's a
That's
separate,
separate.
separate from this, okay.
So moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All right, in that case, can the clerk call the roll?
You see the chair?
Apparently not.
I will do so. I will do so.
Nice.
Get everybody okay.
We're gonna change biennium.
Yes, she's working on it by ambulance.
So,
Right now.
okay, great.
Representative Kowinski,
Yes.
Representative Long,
Yes.
Representative McCoy,
Yes.
Senator Clarkson,
Yes.
Senator Brock. Yes. Senator Kitchell,
Yes,
Senator Baruth,
Yes.
Senator James, I don't think she's there. I don't think she can vote even if she's not visual. I mean, I don't remember what the joint one is, but in the Senate, she has to be visual, but
So that, thank you for that. The separate motion. Jane?
yes,
Would you like to move to accept the design and move forward with it using carry forward money as the budget indicates?
Yeah. I would certainly make that motion, that we approve the design and authorize the expenditure from the carried forward funds in the legislative budget.
Second,
I'll second.
any discussion?
I don't think you can.
This is different. No discussion, so maybe calling the floor roll.
Representative Lampion,
Yes.
Senator Kitchell,
Yes,
Representative Kowinski,
Yes.
Senator Baruth.
Yes. So both motions carry, and I believe that gets the project moving. Thank you all. That's a great relief to have it underway. And any further business? All right, thank you. So we'll adjourn the meeting.